All right, welcome everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture Community Meeting for June 17th, 2021. And thank you to Kirsten for getting our agenda put together today. So we have interesting things to talk about. Why don't we get started? First on the agenda is Jason Hall to give a discussion of KCP. And I guess I need to give you, you're going to present something, right?
Yes, hopefully.
I will make you a co-host then.
Unchecked power.
There you
go. Great. Now I just need to figure out what to do with it. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So I realized only too late that the agenda says demo of KCP, and I just, in typical fashion, destroyed my cluster right before I joined. So I won't be able to do a demo. But for a video of a demo, Clayton, who is also here at KubeCon, sort of went through something you could do with this. I'll step back in case you haven't seen that demo. KCP is a minimal Kubernetes API server. It's basically a hacked up regular Kubernetes API server where every resource that we don't need is completely hacked out. So things like pods, things like nodes, deployment services, blah, 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 blah. Those things are just ripped out. We have namespaces, we have service accounts, and RBAC, secrets, config maps, and then everything else is a custom resource definition. Literally every other object, you can give it back pods, you can give it back nodes, but every resource that we don't strictly need and every controller for all those resources are completely ripped out. This is a hacked up version of the stock Kubernetes API server that we're using to sort of experiment with some things and play around with. And then if this experimentation is successful, we hope, expect, plan, hope to contribute these things, to contribute this sort of architecture back upstream to Kubernetes so that you could run a Kubernetes API server in this fashion or embed it as a library inside your own application. So the first question, aside from like arguing over which resources are needed versus not needed, is usually what would I do with that? Why would I want that? I really like pods, I really like nodes, I really like all the stuff that Kubernetes offers me. So in order to convince people that this is a worthwhile thing, the demo that we hacked up was basically running this Kubernetes API server that doesn't know about anything as a sort of global control plane to talk to multiple clusters. So one of the ways that we are experimenting with all of this is if we wrestled the Kubernetes API server into this small enough shape, could we run it as a service to run a multi-cluster, multi-cluster scenario that just looks like a regular API server? So what that looks like is I'll actually go to the architecture of this. There are other things we could use this for. I'll go into some of those as well. But the main one that we're focusing on right now is multi-cluster. So this is KCP. KCP is backed by etcd. Some people have asked if we could use other backing stores, and the answer is like, sure, if you want to. We're not really focused on that, but in the same way that you can use Kine to back with SQLite, or other people have experimented with other things, you could absolutely do that with KCP too. We're just not focused on it. So KCP is just this little box with this little database behind it. What we do to enable multi-cluster is we attach a controller to that. So it's a regular API server. You can do list and watch, and you can, using the standard client Go libraries, you can talk to this thing just like it's a regular API server. We define a cluster CRD. That cluster CRD contains a kube config to talk to a real cluster. It's not terribly secure. Don't do this in real life. Basically, everything is going to come with an asterisk of don't do this in real life. We're very much flying by the seat of our pants right now. But we run this cluster controller against KCP that watches for cluster CRDs. When a new cluster is registered into the KCP, the cluster controller connects to that cluster and installs a syncer on that cluster. So this is the KCP. So can you see my mouse as well? I hope so. This is a
Yeah.
real Kubernetes cluster with a real API server in it. When you install the cluster controller, when the cluster controller sees a cluster CRD show up, it installs the syncer inside your cluster. And that syncer basically syncs state between the KCP API server and its local cluster API server. And this API server has all the regular controllers that run against it that actually do stuff with things. So when it gets a pod, it will assign it to a node. And when it gets a, load balancer, it will do network stuff. And when it does a volume, it'll do volume type stuff. So a user can give, the other thing it does before it sets up the syncer, it has to figure out what resources this cluster knows about, because KCP is a big old dummy and doesn't know about anything. It says, hey, local API server, what do you know about? And I'll tell KCP about it. So this API server says, well, I know about pods and nodes and deployments and daemon sets and all the regular, the regular cast of characters. And the cluster controller asks the API server and then tells KCP, here are all the resources that API server knows about. I'm going to gloss over a bit of complexity, but maybe we can come back to it later. If it talks to two clusters and those clusters disagree about the shape of a resource, like this cluster is running an old version of Kubernetes that has a deployment that doesn't have this field, and this one is running a newer one that does have that field, it needs to negotiate between those two and figure out what can I actually do? What can KCP actually do with this, the two incompatible types? We can come back to there's a lot of interesting and fun complexity there. But the cluster controller installs a syncer, and the syncer basically just copies objects assigned to this cluster to that cluster where they actually get stuff done. So imagine that it's connected to multiple clusters. When a user gives KCP a deployment, we'll run this deployment splitter. The name of it is terrible in 2 dimensions. It should do more than just deployments, and it should do more than just split. But for right now, it only splits deployments. It watches for deployment objects and says, okay, well, you're a deployment of 15 replicas. I know about 3 clusters. I'm going to create a deployment for each cluster, assigned to each cluster and sent down to each cluster with some subset of that resource, of those replicas, to run your replicas split across these N clusters. And so it does that. It creates 3 extra deployments, each assigned to a different cluster. Each of those are synced to those API servers and run and does the normal deployment stuff. There's a lot of complexity missing from this. Like I said, it should do stuff, and we're currently working on having it handle first objects beyond just deployments, and then eventually anything. It should be able to take any type, any CRD, and have some idea of what to do with it to make it assigned to clusters. And it should take into account things like scheduling and back pressure and all kinds of exciting stuff. But for right now, it basically does this. A user can give KCP a deployment of N replicas, and this system will assign it across many clusters and update the status with, as they are becoming healthy, as they are becoming unhealthy, update their status. And to the user, it just looks like a single regular cluster, right? All this complexity back here, all this other stuff, the many clusters are invisible to the user. And as clusters come online, the deployments will be rebalanced across those clusters. As clusters go away, they will rebalance among available clusters. And yeah, so that's the sort of multi-cluster architecture. I will stop here for questions because I've been talking for a little while, and I see the chat has some things in it, but I can't read it while I'm presenting. So I'll stop here, but there's also more that we could talk about as far as other things KCP might be able to solve, and then I don't know, I guess open the floor to questions in general. Hi.
So I guess
my main question here was like, where do we want to take this, right? And how would we end up using this experiment to bootstrap revitalization of what we are doing in API machinery, for example, right? Like we've been talking about, CRDs as bootstrap mechanism for CRDs. There was like a long thread that just ended with like 2 days ago, with maybe hopefully some outcomes, good outcomes. But then in general, like how do we use this experiment? Like what are we learning there that we can use to either reorganize the code, and like throw things out, extract things out. So those kinds of experiments. What are we learning there that we can use to do our existing code base better?
Yeah. In particular, I think one answer to that is while researching a lot of this stuff, I found a lot of issues that are, it would be nice if CRDs supported this thing that built-in types support, or it would be nice if this behavior was consistent between CRDs and built-in types. And then I completely ignored that as we cut all the built-in types out and made them CRDs, and therefore like weakened the, like pods in KCP can't do things that pods can do as built-in types. So, and a lot of those issues actually like point out, we would love to make CRDs, have uniform behavior with built-in types, but it's a lot of work and we need to motivate that, right? Like we need to have a reason to take on that work.
Right. How do we use this experiment to like come up with like a list of issues that we need to tackle as a broader, bigger team? Right?
Yeah. So far, I haven't, as far as I know, we haven't found any new issues that aren't already sort of known and tracked somewhere. A lot of them are known issues that are just low priority because nobody has built anything that needs them to work. And now KCP might be that thing that needs field selectors to work similarly across CRDs and regular built-in types.
And I was going to add, Jason, actually, like another way of thinking about it too is like there's a lot of people in the ecosystem, in the community, under SIG the multi-cluster working group, people working with API machinery, like K3S went through this, cluster API network or nested. Like a lot of people, I think, they're stretching the bounds of what Cube is. And one of the things that I kind of noticed was everybody's kind of trying to solve a set of fairly similar problems, but they're not all the same problem, right? 3 problems are similar, and then that overlaps with someone else's 1 problem, and then they have 2 different problems. Some of this is like more of a like in the short run, it's less of a here's some immediate things we could go improve beyond what Jason mentioned, but it kind of gets us thinking about like 6 months or a year out. Like, are there like, this is a prototype very explicitly, like let's think about transparent multi-cluster so that a cluster's like a node. Big idea. Syncing is something everybody does, but it's hard, right? Like we tried it with KubeFed 1, we had some challenges. API management was a big problem. KubeFed 2 went a different direction. Karmata goes a 3rd direction. But now maybe we could say, oh, well, if people want API tenancy and CRD negotiation, which Jason kind of mentioned, like that could actually help things that caused KubeFed v1. So I think in the short run, the list Jason had is a good one. I was kind of thinking, could we get enough interesting ideas together that people would say like, oh, well, like the discussion about CRDs is like, well, what if everything was just a CRD? Who would go work on that today? The overwhelmed, tired, broken down Dan Smith? Or, could we create some excitement around, well, I need this, and therefore I'm willing to jump on and say, well, let's go help API server team in a way that's not disruptive to API server team. That was kind of the, I think, I don't want Dan to panic or anything, or I don't want a SIG node to panic or cluster API lifecycle. I was like, how could we like get some ideas that people are like, oh, I feel excited about this versus I feel beat down and this is just one more problem on the list. Yeah, David was panicking. And David's panic is valid, right? Like somebody at the end of the day has got to keep supporting Cube. Could we make Cube more exciting in ways that like push Cube out of its comfort zone and see what changes. So it shouldn't feel like pressure on people.
There's a raised hand.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm panicking, so don't worry. I gotta say I'm a little confused about what KCP is trying to do. I can't tell if you're trying to make a generalized API server framework type thing, or if you're trying to solve a multi-cluster problem, or if it's something else. Like generally, my feeling is like if you're trying to, like it's best to innovate along one dimension at a time, because it's pretty hard to get multiple things right at the same time. So I'm just like, what is your one thing that you're trying to do right here?
I'm gonna push back then and say we are trying to do 3 hard things at the same time, because all the individual efforts along one line have ended up in kind of dead ends, or not dead ends. Like people have gone and looked at namespace tenancy to death. Namespace tenancy has been done to death. What's something that would help namespace tenancy that's out of the blue? Cluster tenancy. And we've done a few explorations of that, but that comes with costs and trade-offs. So we know that that's got limitations. I'd probably say we're going in one direction from a number of existing projects and saying, maybe those come together, maybe they don't. So like CRD tenancy works really well with multi-cluster, because multi-cluster has to be able to encompass the idea of different types coexisting. And then transparent multi-cluster, the multi-cluster stuff, gives us a reason to give a poo, because nobody's going to rewrite all their Cube apps to deal with multi-cluster. How could we help everybody who's writing controllers and apps on Cube to go and level up? So I think it's not trying to be too many directions, but it is a couple of them at the same time. And maybe that won't work, and we'll come back and we'll be like, you're right, Dan, we failed. I was getting frustrated because I do feel we haven't been able to bring a lot of the threads together. And Jason and I were kind of like talking about this with various groups who were like, oh, this would help us. Tell us how it goes. That's why this is kind of framed as a prototype, is let's do some ideation in the open and talk to various groups and see their use cases, versus like, I'm going to open a KEP, Jason's going to open a KEP tomorrow that says like, I think we should do these 700 things, versus like coming back and being like, well, we know that 5 of them failed, but 2 of them are really good. So
yeah, I mean, if you got to do multiple hard things at a time, you got to do it. But I still like, do we feel like we've arrived at a, like, just as one of the examples, do we feel like we know where we're going with regards to like, what is a good multi-cluster aggregation, distribution, et cetera, system, right? Maybe that's like a solved problem in the sense that you know what you're attempting to do. And so the only thing that you're actually innovating on is like, how do you hack up API server to make that possible? In that case, then maybe it's fine to do multiple hard things at the same time. But I get the sense more that like, it's kind of an open world, and we need to experiment both in the like, how do you aggregate stuff, and in the how do you get API server to do the thing that you want it to, right? If you got to solve both of those problems at the same time, that like, I'm not saying it's impossible or anything, if only because I hate it when people tell me that things I want to do are impossible, but it does sound pretty hard. That's my thought, I guess.
And I think we've seen a little bit of that, right? There's a lot of interest. A couple folks I talked to were like, oh, we like the idea that it's kind of open-ended. So there's a little bit, there's 2 parts of it. I think there's like a technical exploration, like force yourself to think about something long enough and new stuff starts occurring to you. Another part is a little bit of like morale building. Could we build some ideas that are interesting that maybe they inspire? And then we come back and we actually say, well, oh, you know what we could do? We could go take virtual cluster and we could amp it up to 11 by doing these 2 things. One of the things I was seeing, and Jason, I don't know if you've seen this as well, is like, there's a lot of people in the community who aren't familiar with all the other things other people have done. A little bit of this in my head was like, could Jason, by going through this scenario, act to work with a bunch of groups and be like, hey, like, what did you learn? What did you learn? What did you learn? Everybody is a little bit in their own burrows. And I was hoping that we could get a little bit of that, like pulled out into the light, either as KEPs or as documentation.
So I think David's had a hand raised for a while. I
Yeah.
also want to make a comment, but let's have David go first.
Thanks. So I was wondering if this could be done in such a way that first we build out an API server that fulfills kube-like contracts for list and watch in a way that you would then be able to reuse it to build the particular use case you have around federation, right? So I can imagine utility in being able to say, you know what, here's a kube-like API server that serves CRDs, and you can have policy around it, and now you can connect to this, but it's not actually the single in-cluster kube API server. And we've seen that request come in from multiple different people in the past.
Yes, I think, if
Okay.
I understand. So maybe like a lot of people were saying like, hey, I wanted to hack up API server in this dimension, or I wanted to do this and this. Is that what you're thinking, David? Like a strip, like Kube API or Kate's IO API server plus Kubernetes / package master --, or are you thinking in a different direction?
I'm thinking something along that, but I would like to sort of see that idea built out in a less hacky way to endorse it as like a, hey, we think this is a good thing. Yeah. And then try to build your syncing layer where you're reconciling schemas across it and figuring out how to create a union custom resource with multiple versions in it as a separate way.
And in the project that's kind of come up is like, there are really 3 different things at the same time. One is what you're describing. I definitely think that was probably the easiest of the things to pull out first. I was hoping that a lot of people would come and complain about what they wanted to change. I think there's maybe a discovery phase that needs to happen still of who would be incentivized to go through all of the different people who've requested and all the issues in Cube and all the folks who've done talks at KubeCon over the years, like Daniel or Jason Tiberius, and then go through those requirements and come up with a list. Like that's probably something that I would say would absolutely expect to be split out of this into its own thread for sure. Not coupled to these. Yeah. It's not intended to be coupled to these pieces. These pieces require some of that hacking. The next phase is more of a principled exploration of the design space, I think.
Okay, because I do think that we can gain traction on the idea of here's my stripped down server and what I want to serve with it. But I think the ideas around schema unification, how that can even exist with independent failure domains and how it interacts with federation, bring up a lot of history with people that are not as well agreed. I don't know if Tim Hawken is here, but
yeah, absolutely. And oh, go ahead, please.
No, that's it.
Well, I mean, I was pretty much just going to say, and I think it's David's comments are aligned kind of with Daniel. Like, to me, yeah, it's clear that the API machinery within Kubernetes is, in and of itself, extremely valuable, regardless of the container orchestration use case. And so, being able to separate that out and make that useful for people without carrying the essentially baggage of the first use case that was built with it is, I think, super valuable. I think in your messaging, the multi-cluster thing actually kind of just confused your message, if that's your message.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that feedback. You are not the first person to come up with that feedback. The multi-cluster possibility is one, I think, very exciting, flashy, scary thing you can do with the minimal API server. Definitely, there are already people building a lot of stuff on CRDs that aren't scheduling pods to nodes or doing any of the other baggage. I'll use your word, baggage, that the rest of Kubernetes gives them. And if a minimal API server that didn't have all of that baggage existed and was easily embeddable and easily runnable, like I think an ecosystem of things would flourish around it. I mean, things are already flourishing with the baggage. So if you remove the baggage, it's obviously it seems like it would be a good area of exploration. Absolutely, like multi-cluster is not. It's very hard to frame, great, because Clayton's saying like we're solving 3 problems, or we want to solve 3 problems. Multi-cluster might not be the one that's exciting to you, to this audience, and in fact adds a bunch of new baggage.
Is rife for, and this is exactly what David said. I think like it's rife for disagreements and arguments that are like completely off topic on what you actually want to push forward.
And this is a really important point. So I would say the majority of people in the ecosystem building applications on Cube are asking for something that improves multi-cluster. So there's more demand, but there's more argumentation. What I was noticing with Minimal API Server is that each of the use cases is niche. Like everybody's in like way different directions. I was kind of hoping that there's kind of like a little bit of a pillar where there's 3 layers. And when you point the pillar out and people are like, oh, I can see you have a couple layers. Can I just get that bottom? They come out of the woodwork a little bit more to say like, I like this, but can I get rid of all this stuff? And then you're like, you got them hooked and you're like, yes, you can. Let's go and do a working group that's a little bit separate from this big crazy multi-cluster. And then they feel better. So like I'm doing, Machiavellian mind tricks with community. I apologize in advance. But like a great example, and this gets to David's point, like when we did this example, I was like, I want namespaces, but namespaces are in core, but pods are in core. You can't cut things out of core in Cube and have a generic client talk to them. So some of those things kind of came up, which was like, oh, like there's some limitations. So I'd say we're really in the prototype phase, it's a little bit tall. And it really is, the moment people are interested in like kind of going broad, we'd cut that part out and go broad on it with a different group. So it doesn't overlap the use cases.
Yeah, this group may already be at 1 step ahead, right? So that may be why.
This is a very savvy, forward-looking, y'all are the ones that I want to trick into the lower level stuff. But then like everybody else is kind of like, yeah, this sounds like a kind of a science experiment in the Cube ecosystem. And we'll be like, well, but what if you could get multi-cluster? And they're like, tell me more. So it's a little bit of a like rabble rousing effort for like, let's get excited about the idea of Cube.
I got to drop, but I just wanted to add one scenario. Like we were talking about the disconnected node on the edge, right? Like, so if we have this there as a proxy that can talk back to the main API server, that is definitely one more example of things that we could do.
There's the use cases people have kind of come up for that require a couple of changes to our client ecosystem that are actually very similar to the changes that you'd need to do like a API server that's not Cube talking to multiple clusters. So some of this would be like, can we get a couple of people familiar with enough of those ideas that they see those connections and then go be like, hey, let's go recruit someone who's excited about this. How do we find parallel? So
anyway, thanks a lot. I got to drop. So please continue.
Yeah, and actually I should say we have 2 more agenda items, so we should probably, unless there's some big, I don't see any raised hands, but I can't always tell. Unless there's big questions or comments, we probably should wrap this up and move on to the next agenda item.
Sounds good. Thank you all for your time, and feel free to ask questions later offline. We have a Slack channel, KCP prototype.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'd also go check out Jason Tiberius is the bad idea.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat.
Good.
I had not seen it before his KubeCon talk, and I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I think it's obviously I think that this is a great idea. So yeah, it is very similar. I think he was coming at it from the point of like cluster API needs some bootstrapping thing to be like, you don't want to have a cluster to create and manage clusters. So yeah, that's a good.
Beautiful. I just want to make sure you were connected.
Yeah.
But that's showing that demand. I mean, there's a demand for that minimal API server within the Kubernetes developer community, and I think the outside, according to what Clayton's saying, he doesn't think the outside world sees that yet, but they will when they want to do some of these things. Okay, cool. Thank you all. Okay, Hippie, you're up, man. Do you want me to display the thing, or you want to be co-host?
Can you display today?
Yes,
something is wrong with our actual local Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Like just trying to get on the meeting this morning was awful, and trying to tether to my phone as a backup is barely working. So yes, I'm on an iPad. I don't even know how to use this thing. But it's good news. The good news is we're going to get likely about 20 points for 122. We've been focusing on apps because when we first started, the apps coverage was really, really low. And that's kind of the thing. People want to deploy their apps on Kubernetes. We want to make sure that the behavior is the same everywhere. We've had 4 promotion PRs this week for a total of 10 points merged, 10 different endpoints within the apps area. And we have 3 more tests merged that we're going to still wait to, got to soak for a while, make sure they're clean to get in at least 7 more. These alone would get us up to 88% by the end of 122. And our hope is that we'll get 100% conformance coverage for people using the apps API to deploy their applications by 123. There's the increase in coverage for the apps area that we're focused on right now, which I think looks great. Just a few more lines to color in there. Those light colored ones will become darker when those 7 endpoints are promoted to conformance. And then those 7 remaining ones should be filled in, like I said, by the end of 123. We had some folks join our call and got to see some of our pair.sharing.io stuff, but then they were quite impressed in our workflow things. I'd love to take a chance to pair with anybody that's interested to kind of see our first in-cluster development workflow that is all cloud native and allows us to have quite a velocity and onboard new people fairly quick. That's me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Hippie. So one question on coverage. How are we doing on catching up to, we had a list of endpoints that, I mean, obviously apps was a big one, of endpoints that have been in the API for a long time, but have not been covered by conformance. And you're burning that down. How is that coming overall as opposed to just apps specifically? Do you have
I'd love to show you, John. Can you pull up API snoop.cncf.io?
Okay.
So glad you asked. This is where you can find out that information. We keep this up to date and we go update this whenever there's that's a fun one. cncf.org is apparently someone else's fun place to play. Plesk, and this is us. For some reason, it's doing 115. You can see what it was back in the day, but let's look at what it looks like now by switching releases to 122, which is our current workflow. And it looks much better. And this is where it lacks. If you'll click on green, it's probably the easiest to show what that stable is, still has holes.
Okay.
Storage, RBAC, and if you want to go down a little bit further, I can't quite, there's a little checkbox, I think, and it's a little off my screen that says only show eligible. So there's a list of things that we've currently said we're not going to test. We should probably revisit that later. But there's the holes. Please color in the number in these spots.
Okay.
Please, if you have a priority next, we'll focus on that. But apps just seemed like the most obvious one. Core is kind of spread across several different things. And if you want to see that list specifically, you can scroll back up to the top. You can mouse over it, which is a little hard to explore it. But if you go back up to the top, there's some links that are interesting. The main one being progress. So on the progress area, there's the graph. And those graphs, you can actually click on what's left. So if you click on that gray area, that's just all the colors together.
Right, but you can see it's shrinking nicely. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely shrinking. This is the measure of velocity of progress, and I'm happy with the work. And I know that I will have a big party when we get to 100%. Everybody's invited to New Zealand to come hang out.
Okay, we're staying at your place.
I like it.
All right, thank you. And then David, you wanted to give us an update here on PRR.
Yes. So I figured I would mention that the 122 PRR review went pretty well. The biggest problem that we found with it was that there were a lot of last-minute PRR requests. A very high percentage came in, filled out the questionnaire in the last 3 days before kept freeze. That represents sort of a loading problem for review. So now that we've collected the percentage, we're planning to go to the release team and see if they can add a check earlier in the process for whether the PRR questionnaire has responses. That'll make it easier to review and people will have thought of it in advance. But overall, the interactions that we had were positive, right? The comments that we gave were well received. People would look at them and say, okay, yes, I can make it easier for a cluster admin or an end user to understand whether this feature is working correctly. And the SIG leads were taking it seriously and helping to develop good answers. The yearly survey that we have been sending out, I guess we sent out once last year, we're sent out again this year to try to gauge the impact of our efforts, has been out, but we haven't looked at the results yet.
Yeah, and I'll pop in there that we really don't have a great response rate. We only have like 27 responses right now, which is a third of what we had last time, which already wasn't all that great. So if there's anybody on this call who operates fleets of Kubernetes clusters and has not yet filled out the survey, please click on that. Every little response helps. And we'll have to do some more. I think I haven't promoted it as well this year, so I need to do a little more pushing on trying to get a few more people to answer.
There is actually, I just found them last week, a group inside of ContribX that owns some Twitter accounts. And if you haven't contacted them already, they can actually make.
I will talk to Bob. He did put it out on the CNCF user group, which was I think helpful, but I don't know if it's been out on Twitter. So yeah, I don't do Twitter much, but I'll put it on my Twitter for whatever that's worth.
Yeah,
but,
neither do I. I was a little embarrassed. I had to say today when they were asking, like, can you review this? Like, I don't know what the Twitter rules are, like how this thing is size limited, right? And I don't know how many characters I'm allowed.
Exactly.
That was awkward, but they were very friendly. So we'll be looking for that response. Having the data every year will help us. I think next year will be the one where we will finally be able to say, did we help or did we not? But right now, I think the reviews are going well, and I would say the project is being successful at its immediate goals.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, David. Okay, that's our agenda. That was quick. We could have talked for 20 more minutes on the KCP.
John, would you mind? Kirsten did come to the call, and I always like to have a little bit of visibility on some of the tooling. And as someone who hasn't seen any of our stuff before, I'd like to get a little hear from her maybe on what it was like to see that work, and maybe a little bit about what she saw about Pair.
Oh, sure. So I can just briefly say I attended the Conformance call just to kind of get a feel for what was going on. It was like super well organized, and they were going through all of the work that they had in progress. But then the lovely gentleman in the group actually stayed around and started showing me some of the software that they're using to pair and do their work, which was like super duper cool. So basically, they have this. I forget what the website is, but they have this tool where you can share a terminal. But then within that terminal, you're actually in a Kubernetes cluster. So like you'd be working with Tiffy and you're like in the actual cluster sharing a terminal, but then you can also like run your tests and do all of these other things like from within this share app. And it was, I don't know, like I actually thought it was just really cool. It was like very polished as well. So it just felt like a nice tool. And it just seemed, I don't know, to me, it seemed really impressive. Like I was like, wow, like a lot of people are going to get a lot of usage out of this because you're literally sharing all of the things that you need to be productive, not just like one screen here or one screen there. It's like, it was just kind of like an all-in-one sort of tool, and it seemed really well thought out. And I just thought, that was actually super impressive for me. Like I was extremely impressed by that, and by how much time is probably not wasted because everything is like all there. And they totally just like showed me everything and answered all of my dumb questions. So it was like a really great experience, just just being on the call and kind of seeing like the work that they're doing for Conformance, but also like these just cool tools that they're developing to like facilitate that work, because tooling is also like a thing that can help other people get a little bit more involved, because you know, like when everything's there and you can pair and share all of this info, like it just seems a little bit less intimidating. So I was super impressed. I thought the tool was pretty slick. Honestly, I thought it was great. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time, because they definitely like stayed longer just to like show me extra stuff after the meeting. And that was also very welcoming and really nice. So just wanted to thank everyone.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Kirsten, and for your interest in our style of programming. I think it'll catch on. And Paris, I did see in the channel the reach out to the SIG contrib comms. I'll also do that as well. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right. Thank you all. Anything else before we get back 15 minutes or so? Okay. Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.